19B. Death. The other world.
Hell yeah.
In Halloween.
Listen, I think, I'll just go off the cuff and say that death is the great equalizer, and there is something comforting about the commonality of that life experience, and like experiencing death bringing people together, and it's used in many different ways. But I think on Halloween specifically, we've referenced in the previous episode about how, like, in sort of pagan traditions, the spirit world, there's like a reckoning, right, of the former dead coming back into our lives, as well as like sort of spirits of mischief that we're sort of appeasing at this time. But I think that Halloween sort of often more so represents to me like that, this alliance of death and life, and like melding it together, right? Like we put ourselves in a position to not only remember that we all die, but play with it, right? To I would say add, like, let the absurdity of our temporality on Earth like really compel us to either scare others into like fearing for their lives, or to maybe even put on the power of death in some ways so that you don't fear it as much. And Halloween in that way is mostly for the children, I think, because you're not only training kids to confront their fears in all manner of ways, either like to say hi to your neighbors, right? Like these people that live around you, you don't know, they are adults, you confront them, you have to greet them at their door, and then they offer you something nice. So it's like it's building connection in that way. So you're conquering your fear of, like, the impending peril of an adult in your neighborhood. But also, like, you're witnessing a very contained form of decaying bodies, viscera, skulls, and dark, creepy places that would normally signal, danger or fear in most people. And you're every year you do it, you get a little better at it. You get a little stronger. You can walk up to that house with all of the decorations. You may be, as you get to older ages, you might be compelled to like venture farther away from your neighborhood into where there are more unfamiliar things. You start to grow in that capacity, and I think in that growth, you then get to an age where you like cycle back into concepts that are more purely around death and decay, and like, oh well, like if you're thinking about harvest and you're thinking about like, oh shit, like, okay, I'm not gonna go that way. I gotta cut that last part because I think I'm losing myself here. But yeah. Let me just get back to the you're journeying as kids to these other neighborhoods. As you're growing up with this sort of concept around death and fear, there is a sense that you are growing into a broader community of people that will die, that fear death, and that once a year have to reckon with, like, I want to say the, like, just general loss, right? Wintertime, I think, brings communal loss to a lot of people. I'm thinking about, like, unhoused people primarily, but also just you really can't face the winter without certain features of, capital. And I think that this is sort of the first holiday that's sort of built around, like, in the season of death, like death is coming. It's sort of the big signpost that death is in the air for society. And to have kids see it in like a play form at first, but then have that morph into something a bit more serious as an adult, I think we're more prepared for that situation. And maybe I'll stop there to see what thoughts you all have on that.
My initial thought is just that like Americans are so isolated and like sanitized from death. Like it's a big part of the culture is like a ignorance of it and a like erasure of death. Um, in the way like funeral customs and stuff too. Like it's all supposed to be very tidied up and but it's ironic. I guess the other thing is I'm thinking about like specifically this year and but in general I know a lot of people that like watch snuff films and stuff as children now that we have the internet and I guess also like the visage of all the different dead babies this past year, all those things that we all have witnessed and slipped through the algorithm once here and there. Corey Bush just posted like a bunch of dead babies. Um, so I think that a lot of children are seeing those too these days, American children. So like, um, but then it's so interesting to have like cartoon skeletons as like that's not even death at that point. That's more of just kind of this astral comforting character that is like maybe that's what the Grim Reaper is to begin with is just like a nice happy not even happy but it's kind of like yeah, I guess that goes to my point about like, is this a recognition of death? This moment where we can all say like, okay, well, this is what death is, and we can cross over there and sort of acknowledge it for once in our culture. What does it mean? Is it hollowed out by the fact that we see death every day for real, um, on social media? And I guess what is the relationship between our mediated relationship to the death of people with our tax dollars on one hand, and then the fact that the only type of death that we see in our on our own soil is usually either in a funeral setting or in like a cartoon setting.
Yeah, there two things that you said, Jackie, really got me, right? Like the Grim Reaper also being a companion that guides you through the death process is part of the like sort of mollycoddling of that process, right? Um, I also think that you change my perspective in the sense that, all right, in the American context, we are playing with death, but death and confronting it is a selfish activity in order to try and like understand it more for ourselves and how it affects us. But as we see death, and maybe as you know, nationally, we condone, support, and deal out or mete out death around the world, and having that be like a NIMBY problem that we confront is maybe part of the American enterprise, right? Like trying to like death is tidy here. Death is something that can be cleaned and can be joked about
Mm-hmm.
because there isn't rampant sort of images of it that we are, or not images. I mean rampant like phenomena of death in our natural lives
Yeah,
typically.
it's funny because actually, now that I think of it, there actually are like there are in school contexts, which is again ties to the last episode about mischief and children. Like America is kind of unique in its propensity for children to shoot up their schools, so there actually is quite a lot of death. But again, even that is kind of like, um, I mean, I don't know.
But
It's interesting
but
that we
but
see images of like dead Gazan babies, but we actually I don't know.
yeah, that's kind of to my point, right? Like we have those school
Hmm.
shooters, but the identity those get pushed out into isolated incidents as
Hmm.
like we want to talk about it as a mental health issue. We bring it to these lofty spaces of like gun control and all of these things, and the families are sort of left to or charged with their own personal grieving, right? Like they are supposed to be the ones that sort of care for their communities, et cetera, et cetera. But I
Mm-hmm.
mean, I want to even say that, like, you know what? I was going to bring in the VP debate and how Tim Walz was like, yeah, my son was in a school or survived a school shooting or something like that. And like using that token as like a political like ploy to talk about or to avoid talking about gun control and avoid talking about the very serious problems of like causes of death in this country. It's like, okay, yeah, we're going to reference death, but we're not actually going to deal with the cause or how it works. It's all individualized eventually.
There's also, I would say that like America's a very undead place. Um, like yeah, I'm thinking about the Flying Lotus album, "You're Dead,"
Love
and there's a
that.
bunch of like similar media that's kind of like, I mean, "You're Dead" is a like jazz, psychedelic jazz, hip hop, electronic album that that brings you to a psychedelic kind of awareness of the strangeness of existence. When I listened to it for this first time, I remember um, feeling transported and liberated in a psychedelic way, so that my understanding of reality became a lot more fluid and trippy after listening to it. Similar to the experience doing psychedelics for the first time or getting super high or whatever, where you get to a place where this feeling that death is liberatory and that like if you accept death, then that frees you to behave differently given whatever experience you're having. I do think that America as a whole has a sort of undeath in that sense, in the sense of like perhaps we've gone through the initial barrier of some kind of like it's embrace of death, and then B, at the same time we're also kind of obsessed with preserving life at all costs, like at all costs, including sometimes at the expense of like sanity or whatever. Like the medical industrial complex is so hooked up to everything that it sometimes deadens the experience of life while also preserving it long enough to make as much profit as possible off of each body. So there's kind of like a dead life, like a preserving of life that is kind of barren, and there's also a kind of psychedelic anarchic urge to embrace that you're already dead. That comes through like rock and roll, blues, jazz, all of our like creative expressions. This embrace of death that kind of liberates one in their current incarnation.
Yeah, I like thinking about embracing death a lot. And something, maybe this sounds a little sick, but like children embracing death early on
Mm-hmm.
seems important to me.
Yeah.
And like as you're saying, like with Your Dead, I would encourage the listener to listen to Coronus the Terminator on that album, and watch that music video, because there is sort of a sort of the washing of the body ritual in that video, but there's also this sense that there's a little boy who's witnessing this, and there is a sort of confrontation at the end of that music video that involves a little boy that gets like a little futuristic. He's got a robot arm, etc. And I think maybe to back up a little bit, my fixation on maybe the like children embracing death comes from a place of like it being like maybe unnatural, right? Like we're talking like part of why Corey Bush posts those photos of Gazan children dead and this sort of like they look like they're sleeping. There's this like we want to evoke their innocence and say it's like this is like the end of life. These two things shouldn't meet. But I think I'm also saying that while they shouldn't meet, they should at least be acknowledging one another. Like there's a certain like character or inherent value that one gains for life by really like digesting death from a younger age. And I'm not saying that like, oh, they need to like see dead bodies, but I think there's something important about trying to get people to deal with mortality, and maybe if they go in a more serious way, it has the potential to avoid the undead feeling of like, oh, I, as a zombie or as I live through death, I am persisting in life blankly. Like there's nothing up here involving like I am a part of death, but I'm also sort of the automaton that is just pushing life forward for the sake of living, right? And if you can break out of that through an acceptance of death as maybe a point to cherish, or like something that like a way to, you know, define how you might want to be remembered or leave your mark on the world. I think that's helpful for kids. It,
Yeah, I'm curious. I won't rehash the whole thing, but I got in a heated discussion with my mom about. Uh, she brought up like composting people, like composting bodies, but like these like this kind of new green like industry of burial, and I was, I guess I'm curious what you guys think, because I think it taps into this like secular or like science based faith of like this, if death is a, an equalizer or a return or something, like then you are spread back into the oneness or whatever. But I was kind of like, no, this sucks. Like, I was like, this is bad. This is stupid. Like, one, who wants to like have to compost people, and like then you're turned into dirt or like some other. I don't know all the ways of doing it, but I'm imagining this very like it's probably real that people are then like donated or sold in some capacity. Like maybe, well, that's already to some extent like real, but I was trying to get at this like, and I don't want to make fun of my mom too much, but she was like, "Oh, well, you don't want to give back, like you don't want to give yourself back or whatever." Like, and said something about like being egotistical or something. I was like, but but what about this like actually giving to people in life? People need money, people need food, people need all those things. Like, are we actually gonna be talking about this as if it's not a ridiculous concept of like, I'm gonna donate myself as only as dirt, but like not my actual time or resources or whatever else. Like, and so I don't know, this idea of like an equalizer and of death still being striated, because not even though if everything dies or we all die, that death is not equal. Some people are chopped up, and
Right.
some people
yeah,
are even after
in
death.
life, in life,
Yeah.
they're also chopped
Yeah.
up.
Yeah, true. So I don't know, Josh, I just kind of wanted to get to this. Well, this one, like this idea of like this equalizer, but also like this communing around it, and like this exchange of like sweetening the whole thing with candy, like this like interesting, like, I don't know, that is tapping into something for me that kind of feels, yeah, like it does on one hand sound nice, like the community of all that, but then yeah, Jackie, I think also like, I think why I got like pretty heated talking about this with my mom was just like, this is a dumb conversation to be having right now when we're watching people being killed, like where we can see dead kids. Like, this is just feels like, uh, Like who really cares about the, I don't know, the emissions or something of like whatever small fraction of emissions is from like uh, decaying or embalming bodies or something. Like I know it's not like negligible, but it kind of is like it just doesn't feel as like, I don't know. It just feels like maybe people use these things sometimes to be like, oh, we want to honor death or something by composting people, and it's just like it just feels fake to me. Like it feels
But
like it's
yeah,
yeah.
it's also like so it's like there should be a place for children to understand death. Like I think like it's
Yeah.
almost a need. Like we need to have some kind of ritual and custom that helps people be exposed to what death is. We need to have a cultural understanding of it. But like in as in the form of Halloween, it all amounts to like, and then like there is a sense that like in Halloween and in this recognition of death, it should be a communal thing, like you said, that democratizes the experience of it and provides us all with the contact with like this sort of like skeleton, this like friendly, smiling bringer of death, you know. Um, but like it's so hollow. But then like the only way that we do it, like in the same way that it's like ridiculous to be like, oh, composting, like that doesn't really like democratize your own death at all. Similarly, like the only form of communal affect we have around death is buying people candy, like buying a bunch of branded candy that itself, like, I mean, sugar and chocolate and are like directly related to moments of colonialism, and to this day are very extractive products to create. Not to mention they poison our bodies. I mean, this is
Yeah,
like a,
yeah, yeah, right.
but
Yeah.
it's like it's so gauche to even bring this up. But like giving out candy is the one form of communal affect we have. When it's like, again, what if we all took like whatever we spent on Halloween candy and donated it to a soup kitchen or whatever?
Yeah.
But
Mutual aid.
yeah. So it's I guess there is something to be said though. I think that there is still potentially like a reclaiming of even the sugary Halloween, like because it is an excuse for us all to like have a vice, including children, like the vice of sugar addiction, and maybe that's related to American understanding of like of uh of sweetening death is to be like, well, I'm gonna sweeten it by having these rushes of experience that are pleasurable,
Mm.
whether it's rock and roll, drugs, or candy.
Yeah, I think two things. I think maybe if I take maybe too many steps back, right? This sort of like, so we're sweetening the deal with death by handing out candy in the community. I also think that we are encouraging children to remember others generally, right? Like as one grows up, they're like, I would, maybe I'm wrong here, but like if I were to die, these are the people that would be around me, and they're not so scary. Like this is not a bad thing. Is kind of where I was going at. So like they've handed me candy like as a kid. This sort of like gesture of like this is like currency for children at this point. But the idea maybe localizing something is where I was going with that, and like as one gets into the fear of death, you can sort of lean on being remembered by those around you. I think that it's sort of like a national funeral to some extent. Now, on the side of like sort of maybe obfuscating the obvious, right, about like how death actually works, how the amounts of death that are around everywhere, I think there's also a sense that feels to me like the American conundrum. Like as an American, my lifestyle is funded by the death and exploitation of others, right? And like eating the candy or even buying the candy and sort of like sickening myself with it. Like I'm also like, okay, yeah, and then the person at the candy factory can now eat and potentially do other things. You know what I mean? Like if I go down that route, I could say like, okay, I'm doing my part by giving money to people outside of my scope. That's not how it works. That's literally me trying to describe like trickle down economics in some ways. But I think that if we think about candy as poisoning our bodies and like that person in the factory is like slaving away to make sure that this king size candy bar is here for this rich kid who's going to eat it, maybe get diabetes and like perish in the same way. I think that is democratizing. Oh, you know what I mean? It's like, there's like
giving you a sugary poison. Like
exactly.
It really is. It directly connects you to the toxins of the world, which we've talked about before as being like toxicity is a way of understanding our common bonds to this dying, this horrible toxic world.
Right? Yeah, because we're all decaying. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
together.
and I feel like the zombie arm style candy. Like if you get like a piece of candy that's branded as a ghost or as a eyeball or as a body part, and you eat it, that is like a rare moment where like the topsy-turviness of everything. Usually the simulation of candy is supposed to be like take the stimulus so you don't have to experience your own death and depravity, like the fact that death is all around you. Usually the normal simulation that's running in America is like eat this candy also being soda, beer, whatever it is, psychedelics, rock and roll. So usually like experience this vibrancy that'll like make you ignore the depravity and death all around you. On Halloween is when the topsy-turviness kicks in, and you actually you could accept the simulation that it's giving you, like, isn't this scary? And then you could actually go with it and say, like, yeah, they're like demonic ghosts that like I am feeding, and they're feeding off of me, and this is like, yeah, it is ghastly. It is horrible because like the sugar and everything is connected to the extraction and climate change and the body part is real. Like there are body parts that you're feasting on.
Yeah, it's like this kind of this remythologizing through like sugar and brands, I guess.
Yeah.
I just wanted to shout out. There's a great book called Sweetness and Power. That's like a anthropology book about like history of sugar. That was really good. I think Sidney Mintz is the person who wrote it. But yeah, sugar is wrapped up in a lot. Sugar, tobacco. I mean, the candy industry and tobacco industry. I don't know. It is all pretty insidious. Do you have a favorite candy though?
I really like Reese's.
Oh, me too.
Hell yeah.
No way.
I love all their other like aberrant mutant little versions of them. Like I love all the fucking weird shit they put out. There's like Take 5 Reese's. There's like Reese's with the Reese's Pieces
Take
inside of it.
good.
There's like potato chip Reese's.
Okay,
I love
Jackie,
all
you
of
said
it.
You said Reese's Pieces. That's how I say it. And then people like
Reese's
made
Pieces,
fun of me for that.
whatever.
Yeah, Reese's
Yeah,
Pieces.
no,
Reese's
I always
Pieces.
said it that way. It just made sense. It sounds better.
Sometimes I try to go. I've been like not doing dairy for a while, like a long time, but whenever I cave, it's often because of Reese's products.
Mm.
And that's
You ever
another
had
thing,
Reasons?
like, because like it's absolutely horrible. If you want to talk about horror, just like look at the way that the way that they source the milk for candy, and like from like this is like the most depraved possible version of extracting milk, which is like truly probably one of the most horrible things we do on this planet, honestly.
Wait, I really would need to like.
Oh, I mean, like just look up like the dairyans. Like there's like millions and millions.
Oh.
There's like millions of cows that are like raped, separated from their children, and exist having like udders being sucked like to the point where they're blistering and they have pus coming out and stuff. And that's it's like and that's the majority of milk.
I thought you were talking about like specifically for candy. I was like, do they do something fucked up different?
I mean,
for
there's
candy?
also the fact that like a lot of the times animal bones are used in the production of sugar, but that's kind of so like literally bones, literally death, like the symbol of
Yeah.
death.
Oh yeah. I
You ever
mean,
had reasons?
What are those?
what the
Reese's
fuck?
They're like
raisins.
these. No, they're like really dense, chewy, delicious, chocolatey bites. Nobody ever knows about them. I don't know.
Reasons?
They're like some of my favorite candy. You ever had Spree?
Spree? What
Never.
candy are you eating?
Yeah, these are some deep cuts.
Oh, these are. Yeah, I don't know. That's why I was
Wait,
kind of
wait,
curious.
wait. Spree? Are they? They're chocolate, right?
Spree? No, they're like fruity. They're like
I've
they're like
seen this somewhere.
chewy or sour.
They're like the sweet
I
tart
don't know.
things.
Yeah,
Like
but they're not
Mentos.
quite like sweet tart. Yeah, they're like a fruity. Yeah, they're almost like the fruity Mentos, but they're delicious. I don't know. I'm just thinking back to candies I really liked. I eat a lot of
Raisin.
chocolate still.
I
But
really like
Oh.
white chocolate, which is like so
Whoa, really?
kind of like
a hot
saturated that
take.
it's like it's like it doesn't feel right, but I've always really enjoyed it.
yeah,
White chocolate
No.
is wrong.
It's like butter.
Yeah, I
it's
don't
like
know.
it tastes like candy butter.
it is
you
like
know?
butter. Yeah, it is candied butter. Actually, I love butter, so maybe I realize one of my favorite foods is probably just bread and butter.
Buttered toast is incredible. That's what I used to always say is my favorite food when I was asked.
Yeah, well, that's what, actually I did recently. I was like, if people ask me what my favorite food is, I'm just gonna start saying bread and butter because it's kind
So
of
funny.
true.
My mom told me that bread is my favorite food as well. So
Is now a time to switch into a new realm?
yeah, I think my last thing is after having this conversation with y'all, I do see that maybe I was a little bit too flippant with the sort of community aspect. Like that's kind of like the rosy picture of how Halloween has like been manifested in my mind, but then there's also this cycle
Wait.
of death. What? Sorry.
But also, like just maybe we should also point out like parties and get-togethers, whatever, are a huge part of all this too. You know, the only aspect of community isn't just the exchange of the candy to the kid. You know.
It's true. That does tie to the next topic too, but yeah.
Yeah, and just beware of the snake of avarice. Thank you for listening.